Okay, so when we're working, it should be somewhat finished. Let me make sure I'm sharing with you guys. Just make sure I don't miss it. So this is my finished image. I went in and I sharpied, or I went in and I shaded pretty much everything in that I felt like needed to be shaded. And I feel as though I've got a good start on where I want all of my stuff to lie. Ooh, what is going on here? So this is my image. Ta-da! This is how it goes. It might look a little tricky because of the fact that it's, shiny, because it's got graphite and it makes it a little extra shiny, gives it a little pizzazz. And you might notice a little bit that some areas are a little bit kind of gray. You can go back in a little later with an eraser if you want to erase maybe some of those areas lightly, because you don't want to erase too hard because then it takes off. Now, what I ended up having to do last night is I left a lot of visible white spaces. So I went in with some watercolor and I laid some more watercolor down to make sure that all of my background is completely covered in white. It's completely covered in color. Because remember, there should be no visible white in the background that is a part of the grading rubric. The composition is the number one, how I laid it down on my paper. And if your composition is too small or too big on purpose, if you can explain that to me in the reflection paper, I will take that into consideration when I'm grading the composition of this piece. So please remember, the composition is how you arrange the objects on the paper. Did you make them too small? Did you make them too large? Number two was basically making sure that the entire background was covered in color, and it had to be with an identifiable color harmony that you've already indicated and selected. All right. So that being said, let's dive right into Sharpie, shall we? So does anybody know what a Sharpie is? Type it in the chat. What's a Sharpie? Someone tell me what a Sharpie is while I grab my Sharpies. If I can find them. Type it in the chat, everybody. What's a Sharpie? Hey, I got my Sharpies. These, my friends, are Sharpies. Ta-da! These are colored Sharpies. They have Sharpie on the side. They are highly pigmented. I don't know why I got a bunch of the pastel colors. Now I'm going to show you guys the difference between Sharpies. This is the one I'm going to use on my piece because we want to use something dark like black. Permanent marker. There we go. Guys are nailing it. So what's the difference? Oh, I can't find my 5-point Sharpie. Okay, this is a micron pen, but the tip of the pen is very similar to the tip of a fine point Sharpie, so I will use this as an example. This one's my dark blue. I don't know if I can find my black. I lost my black. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the Sharpie it just says Sharpie on it. It looks very similar to this, but it says Sharpie. That's the main difference, that and it's not tan. Sorry, I do not know where my fine point Sharpie is. And then we have a ballpoint pen. Ah, there we go. That is a fine point Sharpie. I know I had like a bunch on my desk. I'm going to need to go back into my classroom and write some stuff because I'm like, I thought I had everything under the sun in my house. I guess I'm wrong. But this is a permanent marker. So I want to show you the size difference, and I want to demonstrate the difference between a ballpoint pen, a gel point pen, Sharpies, which are fine felt tip markers. And then I also have, it's in red because I can't find my other ones, but a very fat wide tip Sharpie. So let's start with the pens first, okay? Can everybody see my screen right now? I just want to make sure everybody can see it. Thumbs up, okay. So this, my friends, I'm gonna put it over away so you guys can see all of it. This is a ballpoint pen. So a ballpoint pen, and I don't think you guys are going to be able to see it, but if you get really close to it, the very top here, it has a ball. It's a rolling ball, like very close to a ball bearing, but a very, very tiny scale. And so what happens is when you are drawing on a piece of paper As you run your pen along it, that's why sometimes in the beginning you won't get like a great start. If you run it along, the ball will roll and evenly distribute. Sorry, I can't talk today. The ink on the paper. So that's why sometimes in the beginning a ballpoint pen will be dried out at the top. You kind of have to scribble a little bit before you can get the ink to come out. So this is a ballpoint pen. If you are shading with a ballpoint pen, it takes much longer because the surface area is very small, that it covers a smaller surface area, and it'll take you longer to basically shade stuff in. So next up we have a gel-based pen. Now a gel-based pen is very similar. Most of them have a very small ball bearing on top, but it's got a different type of ink in it. And it gives you a much more evenly distributed ink. That's why a lot of people prefer these. These are like my all-time favorite. And yes, they were super popular in the 90s. So these are not new. Somebody was arguing with me about that the other day. I was like, do you know how many gel pens I had? So this is going to be another one that you could possibly use if you do not have a Sharpie. Now these are Sharpies. This is a micron. These are actually a little bit more fancy, but these are Sharpies. So you have 3 widths. We have a fine point. It's very, 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 very small. Come on, I'm trying to get this to focus. Come on, focus for me. Nope, you're not going to focus. Focus on my hand. There we go. Do you see how small the tip of that is? Very tiny, right? That's going to give you a very fine line. So this is very well known and used for people that do a lot of detail work, like animation artists, people that do anime, stuff like that. Then we have the next size up, which is going to be a fine point Sharpie. I call this one a fine point Sharpie because it's smaller. I call this one a wider tip, even though it does say fine point on it, which can be very confusing, I can tell now. But this one gives you a very wider size, but it's usually at a point. So when you rotate the Sharpie, cat's going crazy, you can see that it's pointed, right? It gives you a little bit of a wider line. So if you have a larger surface area you got to cover, you're going to probably want to use this one. So this, I'm probably going to use in any area here and here that I'm going to have to cover a larger area because it'll take me less time to cover it. Then we have the monster of all Sharpies. This is used, my friends used to use this a lot in high school to do their graffiti practice. They because of the fact that it gets a very nice fat line with it. Do you see the difference between the 3? I wish I could find my black one because it would save me a lot of time. If you need to cover the majority of the space with it, you're going to want to cover this. Now, the tricky part about doing coverage is that when you overlap your Sharpie, you want to make sure that you're keeping the lines closer together, and you want to make sure that it saturates fully. Now, here's the thing. If your ink pen starts to dry out, you're going to get really scratchy lines. So you want to make sure you're typically using something that's fairly new or has enough ink in it. So when you go over with this one, it's going to take you a little bit more time to cover surface area. If you go and you tilt it to the side like this, you're going to be using the edge of the Sharpie, which will give you a little bit of a wider line and wider coverage. So you can easily manipulate the Sharpie to get you something with a finer point or a wider side. That's pretty much the exact reason why we use wooden pencils. It's because you can manipulate the handle of the media to where it'll cover more surface area or give you more of a finer point. This bad boy, same thing with the felt tip Sharpie. No matter how you hold it, that's the only weight it's called a weighted line. So the heavier weighted you get, the wider it's going to look, the lighter the weight, it's going to look very small. This is something similar that you will see in like Photoshop, or if you have Paint on Google, or the old Paint. Gosh, this has dated me a really long time. The old Paint things on the computer where you can paint and make stuff. All right, so that being said, we're going to start on this bad boy. So I'm just going to go over a few minutes with you today. Now you can pick and decide which area you would like to start with first. I'm probably going to go into maybe a little bit of the detail on the hair. It's the same thing with a pen as the same thing with a pencil. If you start somewhere over here and you're right-handed, as you move across the paper, you could possibly smear the ink. So if you're going to work, try to work left to right, similar similar to writing. Or I like to work from top down because I know I won't go back up like this and work top down. So you'll basically go in and you'll locate some point on your face that you feel comfortable starting. There is no right or wrong place to do it. Some people like to go and do the detail work in the eyes and then work out from there. I'm probably going to work from here down. But like I said, it's completely up to you. Now, since I'll be working in the hair, I do want to really kind of get in and get some fine detail work. You might have to rotate your picture a little bit if you're getting a lot of glare from the light source above you. So I'm going to go in with my micron or a fine tip Sharpie if you have it. And I'm going to just outline the area of where I want my Sharpie to go. As you start adding your Sharpie to your paper, you'll notice that the outline will become much more visible. You're going to highlight all of your highlights. So this indicates to me that I need to make sure when I Sharpie all this in, that I'm leaving this area here completely blue. Because I've shaded the back, so I know this is going to be black. But that's going to let that pop of color pop through, which indicates your highlight on the hair. Now you can go through if you want to and Sharpie outline all of the stuff you want to, right? If you feel like that weight is not big enough and you're like, I don't really like it, and you want to go in with a bigger Sharpie to outline it a bit closer, you can. But it'll make the line a bit bigger because the paper absorbs the ink fairly quickly. Yeah, I love permanent markers. I cannot tell you how much I love them. But I will tell you what, alcohol-based ink markers dry out very quickly. It's because it's got alcohol in it. So those drove me crazy in school. But if you want to go in and outline with Sharpie all of your areas that you want to indicate for your highlights and your lowlights, please feel free to do so. The more line work you have going into it, kind of like spikes, it's going to give you the illusion of hair texture. The longer you hold your pen to the paper, the more the paper is going to absorb the ink. So you might have things called blowouts. So a blowout looks like this. When you hold the pen to the paper for a long period of time, it absorbs more ink and it starts to spread, kind of like the bleeding was when we did watercolor. So what I want everybody to do, if you guys are ready for this step, is to go in and start inking out the areas that you're going to be shading in with dark ink. Once we're done inking everything out and everything's been covered, we can go back with a whiter eraser and erase everything after the ink is dried for 24 hours. You're going to want to do it lightly, but what that will do is it'll take away any kind of smudgy marks where anything kind of popped out as being super dark or that got gray and muddy when we were doing this. So that's what we're working on pretty much the rest of today. I will go ahead and show you progress of this as we go along. But if you want to outline certain areas, you can also rotate your paper as you work. So if you get into any trouble where you're like, I can't get a good wrap around, like my hand won't twist that way, just rotate your paper.
I have a question.
Okay, 1 second, okay? All right, so that being said, so for the rest of the period, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in for the rest of this and ink in certain areas. Now, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about inking is once I've outlined the areas that I want to keep and I know it's shaded in where I'm going to actually manually ink everything in, is I'm going to go in and actually ink it. So once inking means basically is to color it in with ink. So it's actually a very popular phrase for basically inside like comic book artists and stuff. And I'm only going to do a very small area so you guys can see what I'm talking about, probably up here in the hair so I don't smudge my ink across my paper. But once you go in and you establish an area that you're going to use as, you know, like, okay, I know I'm going to have this area is going to be dark, this area is going to be light. I like to personally go in and really focus on outlining some areas so I know when I go back in which areas I need to color in and which areas I don't. Think of it as making the outline of a coloring book. Rotate your paper, and I like to use a downward stroke because I feel like I have more control. So I rotate my paper as I'm working through my piece.
What have you been doing this whole time if you haven't been brushing your teeth?
So once you go in and you outline all of the areas you want to, and you go back into ink, it's going to be a little bit easier to see, so where you don't have to shine the paper as much as you were doing during the shading process. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to probably leave this area alone a little bit because of the fact that I don't really want to get into it yet because of the detail that it's going to take. And if I smudge that area too much, I feel like I'm going to lose a lot of my detail. So I'm going to go in and just maybe focus back in the hair. Anywhere that I'm outlining, I know I'm going to go back in with some shading of some kind. I probably start, and when you start going over darker color, it does become a little bit more difficult to see. So, oop, I don't want to forget this highlight. It's okay. So once I pretty much get the gist of where I want all my line work to go, then I feel more comfortable going in and shading certain areas. Now, I did miss a couple spots here because I did want to leave a little bit of the highlights in there. So I'm going to go in, outline a little bit of the hair. It's okay if it's a little gray from the pencil. You can go back in and erase it. I got a little smudgy. If you want to let it dry for a little bit before you go in and you ink it a little bit more, that's totally fine. But what I'm going to do is I'll start down here. So you're just going to go in any part that you see any of the shadow work that you posted for the gray from the graphite that we used to shade. You're just going to go and you're going to ink it in. And that's going to become basically the outline or your shadow. And see how much more it pops off the page? As you add more ink to this, it's going to pop off a lot more. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to go in and really start to shade in just my areas that I know are dark because I've shaded them already with a pencil, right? My paper got really muddy. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to really try to distribute the ink evenly. Sometimes if you go in and you shade too quickly, you'll end up not getting the saturation and the paper doesn't pick up as much as the ink. So go back in and really ink in the areas. Take a minute, let the ink settle and dry a little bit into the paper and look at it. You'll see that the paper is still wet if it still shines. So if I press on it, I might get a little bit of ink on my hand. That's what creates smudging. So you want to be very careful. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to slowly work through the piece until I get ink pretty much put into all the areas that need to be dark. Take your time, make sure your strokes of the pen are really close together, and so on and so forth. Now I wanted to take a second, because I know this is Sharpie, and I'm going to work through, before tomorrow starts, I'm going to shade through pretty much all of the rest of this, so it'll look slightly different tomorrow. I'm going to do the eyes with everybody in class tomorrow and show you how to use a fine point Sharpie to get a little bit more detail. But pretty much, I want to take one more second. I'm going to pull out this old bad boy that I started with. I wasn't liking how it was going, so I used the other paper. Now, if you're using a ballpoint pen, because that's literally all you have, the practice is basically exactly the same. One second, baby. Oh, you're gorgeous. No, I love your earrings. So it's gonna take a little bit more time to outline, and you want to make sure you're in a well-lit area, but you're gonna do the exact same process. But here's the thing, when you're using a ballpoint pen, it puts pressure into the paper much more. Bye, gorgeous. I love you. So it's going to take a little bit more time for it to Sharpie or to color in, but it is possible to do this with a ballpoint pen. Now, your ballpoint pen might get a little sticky. It might stick a little bit, so you might have to run it through a scratched piece of paper to get that ink rolling again, because it builds up on the actual ballpoint. So go in, shade it. The more of a vertical that you have, I know I have ink in there, darn it. The paper sometimes can come off and it's a little bit more difficult. So it could be a little bit more difficult to ink. If you also have a gel pen, you could do a gel pen as well. So going in, gel pen will probably be a lot easier for you to use. Now I don't have a black gel pen at this time, but you can go in and lay a nice layer of ink down with a gel pen. You have to be, it's going to take more time because you have to make sure the strokes are closer together. But with a ballpoint pen, you might get a little bit of shine, but with a gel pen, you're probably not. But just go in and then outline the area that you want to focus on. And then you just go in and make sure your stroke pattern back and forth with your wrist is close together so you don't get a lot of visible background. That's why this technique takes longer. But it is possible to do it with a ballpoint pen or a gel pen of some kind. It just takes a lot longer to complete. Looks like the gel pen's working a lot better than the ballpoint pen. But yeah, just go in and outline the area just like you would a Sharpie. You might need a piece of scratch paper to restart your pen if it's not working. And then you go in and you just shade. So hopefully this helped you guys out. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to come see me during office hours at 2 p.m. today. I will see you guys later. Have a fabulous day.